Okay, so in this video, we are going to look at profit maximization. And so we've said we're making a key assumption, and we're going to develop out this assumption about the market later. And I'll talk about perfect competition. And that's going to allow us to come up with the marginal revenue curve, because we're going to assume that in a perfectly competitive market, a firm, and these are the short-run cost curves of a single firm, a firm is a price taker. And so we said that price is also going to be the marginal revenue curve, or the additional revenue from sale of an additional unit of a good or service. And if you think about that, that makes sense. You can't price discriminate, and we'll talk about imperfect competition later, and price discrimination later. So your revenue is a constant, or your marginal revenue is constant. It doesn't vary with output, and we're going to represent that by a straight line, right? So we're going to assume that there's going to be, so I'm going to go ahead and draw price / the marginal revenue curve. And it's also the average revenue curve as well, and the firm's demand curve, because we said that, again, I'll develop out this idea of perfect competition later. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but we're going to make that assumption about the market to be able to derive this marginal revenue curve, right? So right here. And then we said that the profit maximization is always going to happen at the intersection of marginal revenue and marginal costs. So it's right here. And we can actually think about profits. We can go all the way down to the average total cost curve and go all the way across. And that would represent, I guess I'll represent that with blue. So if price is at, above the minimum point of the ATC curve, right here, the intersection of marginal revenue and marginal cost is going to be the profit maximization point, as we can see here, and that's quite a bit of profits earned by this firm. So let's think about other price points, right? And if you're a firm, you can't influence the price, right? We're assuming perfect competition, so we can build these models that are quite unrealistic, and we're going to get into more realistic models in Unit 4 when we talk about imperfect competition. But remember, in economics, we study extremes to understand the range of possibilities that exist between those extremes. So at this, right, where the marginal revenue curve is kind of a tangent to the minimum point of the average total cost curve, that's a firm in normal profit, meaning has zero economic profit, right? Then we can also think about, what about a price point in which the marginal revenue curve is above the minimum point of the average variable cost curve, but below the ATC curve? What does that mean for the firm? Well, it means that the firm is experiencing losses, right? We would go, same logic, go all the way up to the ATC curve to see and quantify those losses. And here I'm going to represent that by having a bit of red right here. That would represent those losses of that firm. But fixed costs in the short run are sunk, right? And so essentially you're making enough to pay for your variable costs, but you're not making enough to pay for your fixed costs. So the decision of this firm will be to stay in the short run and exit in the long run. And then we can think about a price point being below the AVC curve, average variable cost curve, right? What does this mean? Well, we can also represent graphically the sort of actually the intersection is right here, right? Intersection of the marginal cost curve. Oops, I messed up, right? Because profit maximization is always going to be the intersection of marginal revenue and marginal costs. So right here, and go all the way up to the ATC curve, and then this area right here would be the losses. But a firm in that scenario couldn't even pay its variable costs, its workers, so they would shut down in the short run and exit in the long run, right? Okay, now let's think about the difference between long run cost curves and short run cost curves. So in the long run, we hold all factors of production variable. All factors of production are variable, and we allow exit and entry in the long run, right? So here we assume that you can't exit or leave this industry in the short run, but in the long run, we allow exit and entry. And so this is going to have significant implications for the model and sort of the graphical representation of that model that that kind of or the graphical representation, right? Because in the long run, fixed costs are stuff that you still have to pay in the long run, but you can optimize, right? Capital varies, right? It's a variable input, and you can optimize and choose the appropriate amount of capital for your predicted production, right? So long run cost curves are going to be or the long run cost curve, the long run cost of producing a good or service is going to be everywhere lower or equal to short run cost curves. And we can see right here that long run cost curves can actually, the way that we can kind of wrap our heads around this idea is that long run cost curves, because you can optimize, right, your capital. Right, we can see a short run cost curve of 1 oven, a short run cost curve of 2 ovens, short run cost curve of 3 ovens. We can think of the macaroon example that we have. You can optimize in the long run, you know, the perfect inputs of capital with respect to the long run cost curve, or the perfect input of capital for production, for whatever amount of production that you want to produce. Let's say the demand for my parents' macaroons goes up considerably. Well, maybe they want to consider getting another kitchen, so that way, you know, they can produce at a more cost-efficient point. Maybe transition from SREC1 to SREC2. We also thought about the example of Tesla, where Elon Musk underestimated the demand for Teslas and was producing at a rather, you know, unfortunate short-run average cost curve, and decided to move to short-run average cost curve 3 to accommodate that demand, right? Because capital is variable in the long run.